Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Beth Bruno about creating rites of passage, what girls need from their moms, and how to raise strong, confident kids.
My mom has always dreamt of doing a big bike trip, and I thought the Netherlands is the flattest country in the world, so how hard can it be? She's not as consumed with bodies, boys, and besties like her peers are, and it makes her different, and honestly, that has been a challenge. In a way of let's find out what they're doing and what they need from us, and how can we align to their vision for their community and come alongside of them and just support them.
In the summer of '99, Sarah Breedlove looked in the mirror and noticed something that no woman wants to see: patches of scalp where there should be hair. After years of denial, she finally had to face the truth. She was going bald at 32. And this is the very last thing one needs, especially alongside raising a toddler, working odds and ends jobs to pay the bills, and attending night school. But the truth was, Sarah was no stranger to adversity. An orphan at 7, a mother at 17, and a widow at 20, Sarah had had her fair share of disappointments and setbacks. In the summer of '89, 10 years earlier, she and her 5-year-old daughter moved across the country to St. Louis to be near her brother, in hopes of finding a fresh start. She soon met a man and married him, only to find out that he had a fierce temper, an even fiercer girlfriend, and wanting to protect her daughter, she divorced him right away. And that is where she finds herself, looking in the mirror, a widowed and divorced single mom, making less than minimum wage with barely enough time to wash her hair, and now it's falling out. But Sarah was determined that this was not going to break her. She was tenacious and more interested in dreaming up solutions than dwelling on disappointments, which makes it incredibly ironic that one night, after another long day, Sarah had a literal dream, a vivid one where an old man revealed to her a mixture of herbs and oils that would solve her hair problem. In fact, it was so clear that when she got up the next morning, she knew exactly what to do. She mixed up the tincture and used it every day for the next few weeks, and after some time had passed, she realized it was working. Her hair was regrowing, and she was convinced she had dreamed up a recipe for success, and not just a recipe for success, but a literal recipe. Sarah couldn't rationally explain what had transpired, but she knew she was onto something and wanted to help other people who had the same problem she did. So she started bottling her tincture in her kitchen and then walked door to door for 12 hours a day selling the product. And when she had hit every door in her own neighborhood, she drove cross-country with her daughter, selling the product and teaching her what hard work and a passion to help people looked like. Slowly over time, Sarah was able to save enough to open a factory. Then she opened hair colleges across the country and ultimately created 40,000 jobs here in the U.S. Sarah is one of the greatest entrepreneurs of the modern age, which makes it crazy that you have likely never heard of her. I hadn't until I listened to an episode of Mike Rowe's podcast where he shares her story. And the most fascinating part is that all of this happened a century ago, in 1905, to Sarah Breedlove, more commonly known as Madam C.J. Walker, a woman who started working at 5 years old, picking cotton alongside her parents who were sharecroppers and worked as slaves. Sarah went from picking cotton to becoming the first self-made female millionaire in American history. It was her inner fortitude, her tenacity, passion, and fierce determination to follow her dreams, literally and figuratively, that helped her thrive in spite of setbacks, which is something to remember anytime the work feels too hard or the odds seem too impossible. And so the question that rises up in me when I hear stories like this is, how can I muster this same inner fortitude and passion? And how can I help my kids develop it as well? I think one small step is to relearn the ancient habits, rituals, and rites that make us resilient and confident. Rituals that are time-proven, like rites of passage. And in this next interview you're about to hear, we're going to talk about creating rites of passage for our kids. But the conversation isn't just about helping our kids. It's about the idea that rites of passage are essential to help all of us, even us adults, to help us remember who we have inside of us and to mark a fresh start as we transition from one stage to the next, whether it's a milestone birthday, leaving a job and transitioning to something new, making a major life decision, or finding a fresh start. And so, to give us some ideas on how to do this well is my guest today, Beth Bruno. Her newest book is called A Voice Becoming, and in it she shares about how she created a year-long rite of passage for her daughter in order to lift her eyes out of the era of teendom with delayed responsibilities and an obsession with bodies, boys, and besties, and instead helped her realize her own inner fortitude, passion, and desire to help others. Beth was so kind to give me an extra copy of her book to give to one of you. So you can go to MOPS Facebook or Instagram. That's MOPS International. And there's a post on there that has a picture of Beth. And I want you to go and tag me in that post, and we'll randomly choose one person to mail it to. You are going to love it. It's one of the best books I've read this year. And now, without further ado, here's my friend, Beth Bruno. Beth, I am so excited to talk with you today about raising strong girls. And a few years ago, you decided to create a year-long rite of passage experience for your daughter that would help her understand what it meant to be a woman. So where did the idea for this kind of rite of passage come from?
I think, Mandy, it came out of feeling kind of scared, honestly. We had walked through the little years and early adolescence, and there's so many great resources for parents in that stage of life. And we had a lot of friends who are raising kids, our kids' age. You do a lot. There's the whole play date and sports sidelines kinds of things. But as our kids were getting older and their activities were increasing, we were seeing parents less and less. Our friends were becoming fewer and fewer, honestly. And the resources felt like they were getting thinner as well. And so we looked to kind of what was available for parenting teens and raising successful young adults. And we felt like we were kind of floundering a little bit. So I think initially it came out of our own fears. And just feeling alone. And then I guess secondly, I would say it came out of our own work. My husband is a counselor and was seeing a lot of teenage boys. I do work with prevention of human trafficking in high schools. So I was seeing what our kids were about to enter into on a daily basis. And I think out of that as well, we felt like, oh my goodness, we have got to be prepared. And this is going to take a level of intentionality like we have never experienced before. So I would say out of those kinds of experiences, we began to consider how to do this well.
I love that so much. And having two teenage daughters, I just see the need for it. And I absolutely love your book. The title's A Voice Becoming. And in your book, you share about how you framed this becoming year around God's question to Hagar, which is, where have you come from and where are you going? And so what were some of the things that you and your daughter did over the course of the year? And what kind of practices did you feel like were important for her to experience?
Yeah, well, let me back up just a minute and explain even why we decided to make it a whole year, because I think that's so unique. As we began to realize we needed to be intentional in a way we had not been,
Mm.
we started to learn about rites of passage processes, and we learned about what they had looked like historically and in other cultures, and then we also were looking at what we saw in America, and what was available to parents like us seemed to be short weekends or ceremonies, and those seemed meaningful. But in light of what we were looking at in terms of culture and the realities our teens would face on a daily basis, they just didn't feel sufficient. And so we decided that to really shift their eyes out of what I call the teen obsession with bodies, boys, and besties,
Mm.
to kind of lift their eyes out of the teendom of day to day, we had to go big. We had to create kind of a year-long epic journey that would cast a vision for a bigger story, and a bigger story that we believe God is telling through them and in the world. And so that's how the year came about. I don't know about your kids, Mandy, but mine have such a short attention span. And I knew that it would have to be a conversation we revisited over and over again, that I would pepper the year with movies and experiences and book discussions and intentional lunch dates so that all that I wanted to communicate to my daughter would really sink in. And so that's why it's a year. I just wanted to kind of explain the purpose of it being so long. And the framing that you mentioned around God's questions to Hagar, I think are crucial. So his question initially is, where have you come from? And I began the year with that question, really grounding my daughter in her family narrative. You know, our kids are born into a moving train. There is a story that is already unfolding when they enter into it, whether it's entering into a biological birth family or joining through adoption. They have joined a story. And so to have a strong sense of what that is and how that has informed and shaped their life, I think is really important to give them a solid foundation, because at the end of the year, we are asking the question, where are you going? How are you going to enter and live into the story God is telling in your life? And so to be ready to ask that question, I believe they need a strong sense of where they've come from. And so that's why I frame the year around those two questions.
That's awesome. In the book, you talk about crafting a legacy event, and I thought that was really profound. Would you share about the experience that you created for your daughter?
Sure. So the legacy event is a point in time that it officially ends. And I think that has always been important with rites of passage processes, where the kids know at the end of this, I am now declared ready to join the company of men or the company of women. And so the legacy event marks the end of the intentional year of becoming. And it needs to include a couple of different things. And again, this is based on what we see throughout various cultures. It needs to include some sort of test in the sense of, were you listening? Were you listening all year? Were you learning? Can you articulate the various elements of womanhood that we have talked about? Can we deem you worthy to join the company of women? We also need to include an element of blessing. Just, we are blessing you. Join us. Join your sisters. You are ready, and we deem you worthy. And so having that blessing. And then I wanted it to be kind of an epic journey where we really pushed ourselves. My daughter especially needed a sense of a physical test. Her older brother had also done a rites of passage with my husband, and she had watched that, and there was definitely some physical elements to that. And so with this particular daughter, I knew that it needed to have something physical. And I tell moms, it does not have to be elaborate. It does not have to involve travel, but for us, for a lot of different reasons, it did. And so we went to the Netherlands to do a bike trip. And that was somewhat because my mom has always dreamt of doing a big bike trip. And I thought the Netherlands is the flattest country in the world. So how hard can it be? So I wanted my mom to join us. And we went to the Netherlands because not only is it the flattest country in the world, but I figured a country that had produced Corrie ten Boom and Anne Frank and so many female heroines from World War II surely had other women that we could look to and model some of the qualities we had talked about throughout the year after. And so we went on a hunt. We went on a hunt for strong women. And we went on this epic bike journey that kind of served as the perfect metaphor for us to start asking the question, where are you going? And it became so pertinent because every day we were lost. Every day we lost the trail. Every day we lost the bike path. And it was a constant question of, where are we going today? So it became a beautiful metaphor for us to talk about that final question, launching her into womanhood.
How ultimately did your daughter feel about the year during it and then now looking back on it?
Yeah, I would say leading into the year, she and I had some rough patches connecting. We're really similar in some ways, and I think we were experiencing some conflict around that. And so my communicating to her that I have thought through a meaningful year. I have been planning and preparing and praying over you for this year. Initially, that communicated so much to her. And then the time spent with her in intentional ways and one on one ways was additionally just so good for our relationship. She ate it up. And I think as a result, was willing to do some of the things I was asking her to do that were stretching, reading various books that she would never have picked up on her own, for instance. She was more receptive to it because she knew it came out of this intentionality that I had toward her. At the end of the year, she has said things like, I'm going to run for president so I can make a becoming year mandatory for all girls. um, she has also, though, experienced some, it's distanced her from her peers because her eyes are cast to this bigger vision that God is telling in the world and through her life. And she's not as consumed with bodies, boys, and besties like her peers are. And it makes her different. And honestly, that has been a challenge in the last few years since we concluded her becoming year. Worth it, I would say, for both of us, for her as well, but definitely a challenge nonetheless.
And I thought you made a really important point in the book where you talk about how ultimately we're raising women, not American women. And if we believe women were
Mm.
created in the image of God, then we should expect to see similarities across cultures and generations. And so, what does it look like to show our girls that they are part of a global sisterhood?
Oh, I think that is so important, and probably the biggest thing for me in the book, and with this becoming year. And I think one of the easiest ways we do that is just introducing them to story. And there's so many ways to find stories of our global sisters who are doing incredible things around the world. And so whether it's fiction, whether it's or nonfiction or documentaries, there's access to stories of our global sisters. I've exposed my girls to movies with subtitles that are filmed in various countries around the world. And again, that's one of the stretching things. They would never have chosen to watch a documentary with subtitles before. But as a result, we end the movie and we all have tears in our eyes because we're so touched by this particular girl or this particular woman who we're learning about. And so that would be one way, is just through story. That's pretty accessible to all of us. I think perhaps a more challenging thing to access would be real women from other cultures. And that varies depending on where we live and what's going on in our city. And yet, with a little bit of digging and a little bit of research, we can find women who might be a part of our local university or who might be just belong a part of a different church or some sort of cultural awareness club where we could just join in on a meal, join in on a lecture, um, just invite them to talk with us so that we can learn. So there's a lot of ways to craft experiences for our daughters to be exposed to our global sisters. But I think it's crucial, especially in this day and age, for us to realize that we are sisters and we need each other. And I think one of the big things I want my daughters to realize is that we have a certain level of privilege as Americans. And so how do we use that privilege to benefit our sisters, and not in a handout sort of way, in a charitable sort of way, but in a way of, let's find out what they're doing and what they need from us and how can we align to their vision for their community and come alongside of them and just support them in the way that they're leading forward. And so, again, I think exposing them is just, it's what we need in this day and age, especially as Americans.
And you really believe in the power of story, and you talk about big story living versus small story lives. Will you share about the difference?
Yeah, I'm still working that difference out in my own life. But as an example, just yesterday, my 12-year-old, my youngest daughter, came home so discouraged. Her friends had teased her about her outfits, and um, that was the conversation of the day. How could she possibly have paired those pants with that sweatshirt? And I think that is a seventh grader's reality. That is the drama of her day. And that is what her peers are concerning themselves with. And it's unsettling, obviously, to any girl. And yet, I've started her becoming year, and I'm having her read a book right now about Katie Davis, who moved to Uganda as a 19-year-old and ended up adopting, I don't know, 13 Ugandan girls and becoming a mom by the age of, I don't know, 21, 22. And so my daughter was reading this in her last class of the day and reading about some of the issues that Ugandan orphans are facing and why they're being orphaned and the hurdles they're having to overcome. And so, though she had been discouraged most of the day over being picked at and made fun of, she came home with her spirits lifted higher because her frame of reference had been shifted. Now she was realizing, in light of what my Ugandan brothers and sisters are going through, being picked on over my clothing choice is really insignificant. And I feel like that's a great small example of the difference between a small storied life and a big storied life. And what I'm trying to do with my girls is to, yes, they are living in the midst of those sorts of stories every day. They still impact them. But can I lift her eyes above them so that that's not what she obsesses on? That's not what makes or breaks her day. But she's able to look beyond and above and have a vision for more so that she can just keep things in perspective and remind herself that there are such bigger concerns in the world and there are things that break God's heart in the world, and it's really not her clothes. So I hope that helps explain just a small example of what I mean by the difference there.
Totally. And I think um, that is what we all want for our teenagers, to be able to lift their eyes out of the day to day and see their bigger purpose in the world. And so I have a question for you. What does it mean for you, Beth, to live a remarkable life? What does that look like for you?
Hmm. I'm trying to figure out how I've been created and what I'm here on earth to offer. Um, and I think that changes through our seasons of life. And right now I'm in the middle of a big transition personally where I have felt the last 5 years have been very clear. I could have very easily answered that question. I was, I've been passionate about a particular issue and a particular people group in my local community around human trafficking, and that has driven me. And it has been the passion and purpose for which I have lived my life. But I have felt an invitation to step away from that over the last year and a compelled sense that there's something next and different for me, but I don't know what it is yet. And so I think wrestling with that question of, I know there's a purpose for me. I've been created in a certain way to offer unique things to this world. And so that's where my eyes are directed. And even though it's fuzzy right now, it's not clear right now, there's still this sense that it is there to be discovered. And so it's just an interesting place I find myself in, and I'm sure a lot of women are in a similar place where they're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean to live a remarkable life? And I think it's making sure we have that frame of reference, that perspective that we are meant to have one. And so let's really discover what it is. Let's press in to what breaks our heart, what makes us angry, what makes us cry, what motivates us, what makes our blood boil, what gets our heart pumping. Those are all clues to the ways in which we've been created and the purpose that we have been given. And so now, once we identify some of those things, now it's a matter of figuring out, well, what does that look like here in my reality, in my community, and taking the meaning that we've kind of discovered for ourselves, and now finding the pragmatism, the tangibles that we can pair with that meaning. Does that make sense?
Totally. Totally. So good. Okay. My favorite question to ask all my friends. What is the best advice you never got?
The best advice I never got. The best advice I never got regarding parenting my kids, I think, would be to just hold things loosely, to not be so fearful so much of the time about who they're becoming and the choices they're making and the things that I'm doing or not doing with them on a daily basis, to basically relieve some of the pressure and to realize that so much of it comes just from the heart that I have toward them and the intention that I have toward them, far more than the things that I do, the things that I say, the ways that I control and shape them. It's really more about my heart toward them. And I wish I had been told that 18 years ago when I first became a mom.
Yes, seriously. That is so true. So good. Okay, one more question for you. What are you doing right now in your life to cultivate more fun?
Well, right now I mentioned going through a bit of a transition, just vocationally, stepping back from an intense season of entering into some really dark spaces, honestly. And so naturally, just stepping back from that has brought so much more levity to my life.
Hmm.
And I feel like I have the capacity and the space to choose fun in some different ways. And here's a crazy one that I don't think I've ever done in my entire life. Yesterday, I came home from working out and I took a bath, and it was like 10:30 in the morning.
I love it.
And that felt so like indulgent and
Mhm.
luxurious. I was sore and I had the space, and I chose to do something fun for myself. And like I'm still kind of reveling over the fact that I did that.
That is so great. So good. Beth, thank you so much for casting a vision for all of us to create rites of passage for our kids, because it can revolutionize and reorient the trajectory of their entire lives. And so I just thoroughly was inspired by A Voice Becoming, and can't wait to craft a year experience for my girls. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Mandy. Great to talk with you today.
Thanks so much for listening today. One thing I know about living with tenacity and passion is that it takes other people around us to cheer us on. And if you are looking for some mom friends, then the best place to find them is at MOPS. And so go to our MOPS group search page and find a group in your area. You will not be disappointed. And now, go out and have more fun, and don't come back until you do.